Dates in the Bible don't quite match the marriage certificate. Uh-oh.
And welcome, America, to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth, on the program where we shake your family tree and watch the nuts fall out. Well, here it is. It is RootsTech weekend. We're going to be talking about RootsTech Connect. It's all virtual this year. It's all free. And we've got so much to cover on that coming up in a little bit. We got a couple of guests today who are not normally genealogists. One is David Zucker. He is the man behind the movie Airplane and Naked Gun. Yeah, he's a comedy movie creator. And he did some research on his family and has written a book about it. He wants to inspire you to do the same with your research. And Deborah Yates, who's of Cherokee descent, she's a landscaper. She made an amazing discovery about one of her Cherokee ancestors. She, too, has written a book, and we'll tell you all about that coming up. Plus, Sabin Streeter is back, the showrunner, producer, director for Finding Your Roots with Dr. Henry Louis Gates, talking about the most recent show in the series that you'll want to catch and stream as soon as you possibly can. Hey, if you haven't signed up for our weekly Genie newsletter yet, now is the time to do it. Just go to ExtremeGenes.com or our Facebook page, and we'll get you all hooked up. Right now, it's time to head out to Boston, and David Allen Lambert, the chief genealogist of the New England Historic Genealogical Society at AmericanAncestors.org. David, great to have you back. It's been quite the week.
It really has. RootsTech has been amazing, where I found out I had over 15,000 relatives attending and found some third cousins I didn't even know about.
How about that?
But you know what I think was really great? We were on that call together with RootsTech the other day with Steve Rockwood and David Brencher and others. And the new website that Family Search has rolled out, familysearch.org/family-history-library, is great.
Yes, and this allows people now to actually have free consultations with experts in every area of the world. And it's also a way that they're going to be taking all the family history centers and all the resources they have and funneling them into one access point. It's going to be a fabulous thing as it continues to develop. They've got some new software they're working on that can actually translate handwriting. I mean, it's just amazing, some of the things coming up with Family Search that they've announced in connection with RootsTech Connect.
It really is. There's probably more things to come. But as you mentioned, RootsTech is not just 1 week. It's actually all year long.
All year long. So it doesn't matter whether you're catching this now or later. It's still happening, and it's absolutely free. So get signed up and see what you can learn to help you break through some of your brick walls.
It's going to be fun.
And David, I got to tell you, even through all this, I made a great find this week. I discovered that my grandfather Fisher actually had an old presidential flag that had flown at events that were attended by President Woodrow Wilson and President Teddy Roosevelt and President William Howard Taft. Now I'm trying to figure out who's got it now among the descendants.
Well, I get a story that has a flag tied to it. I didn't know my Canadian ancestor was originally from England and was a member of the 38th Regiment of Foot at Bunker Hill.
Oh, yeah. How do you think your SAR status is going to be affected by this?
I am the state historian. It'll be an interesting story to tell at the next meeting. So
just make sure you attend that meeting in full British regalia, because otherwise you could be hanged as a spy. We don't want any of that.
I'm just glad that my mother's relatives and my father's relatives didn't have good aim.
Yeah,
I might not be having this conversation.
Exactly.
Well, you know, my first story for Family History News goes to Salem, Massachusetts, and is a little bewitching because this kind of just materialized recently in the news. In the U.S., we have had censuses since 1790. In some places, they no longer exist. In fact, I found remnants of the Boston taking tax records that reassembled the missing 1800 Boston census. Now in Salem at the Phillips Library of the Peabody Essex Museum, a researcher is transcribing the local copy of the Salem 1810 census, which doesn't exist at the National Archives in Washington.
Wow, what a great find.
It's a good one. You just never know what you're going to find. So hopefully there's more hope for other places like New Jersey that doesn't have hardly any censuses around that time. I remember in the 80s, mullets were a big thing. Now, I never sported one personally, but one of my ancestors may have. They recently unearthed a figurine in ancient Britain that may show that our first century British ancestors may have sported mustaches and mullets.
They were headbangers even then, huh?
I guess so.
Where did they find it?
They found it in a car park.
Once again, they find kings, they find figurines. These car parks are great historical sites, aren't they?
You just never know what you're going to find parked under your RV. We had the Egyptian brewery story last week, so it has to follow up with another one. Archaeologists are digging again into drinking establishments. In the Orkney Islands, a Viking drinking hall has been recently found.
A Viking drinking hall. That's great. So we found the brewery in Egypt last week. Now it's the drinking hall. Is there a big sign that said, "Welcome Vikings"? Is that how they knew that it was a Viking drinking hall?
They probably took what they wanted and started their own drinking hall after the fact.
It could very well be.
Well, we always hope to find DNA matches that tie us back to the UK, but I've got a different type of match that I hope to find. There's a company called Finders International, which provides probate genealogy in Dublin, London, Edinburgh, and Australia, and they actually are connecting Americans with long-lost Irish relatives that had estates that have never been probated.
Really?
It would be a great pot of gold to find, but I'll settle for a DNA match or two as well.
I think so.
Well, that's all I have from Beantown this week, so I'm going to offer you a pot of gold on AmericanAncestors.org. Using the coupon code EXTREME, you can save $20 on an American Ancestors membership. You heard it here on Extreme Genes. All right, talk to you soon.
All right, David, I'll catch you at the back end of the show for Ask Us Anything. And coming up next, the first of a couple of amateur genies who've written books about their discoveries. Our first up is David Zucker. He is the man behind the movies Airplane and Naked Gun. You wouldn't think that a guy with all that humor would spend so much time researching, but he has. You'll want to hear the book he wrote about his family coming over to Milwaukee from Eastern Europe. That's all coming up next in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. RootsTech Connect is here. Will you be there? RootsTech is a gathering unlike any other. Get ready for 72 hours of family discovery and celebration as part of this free virtual event from February 25th through the 27th. Be inspired as you listen to electrifying and uplifting keynote speakers from around the world, and even see how you're related to any of more than 200,000 registered RootsTech participants wherever they are in the world. This is the 11th annual RootsTech event, sponsored and hosted by Family Search. But this year is different. The entire event will be delivered virtually and free of charge to anyone in the world. Register today at rootstech.org. Customize your experience by creating your own conference schedule from hundreds of engaging video classes. And don't forget to check out the virtual exhibition hall. Join us for as much as you'd like from the comfort and safety of your own home. Register today and then tune in February 25th through the 27th. Learn more today by visiting rootstech.org. Hey, it's Fisher, and here it comes, RootsTech Connect. We've been hearing about it for a long time. It's going to be February 25th, 6th, and 7th, and Ancestry.com is going to be a big part of it. Krista Cowan from Ancestry is on the line with me right now. And Krista, what do you guys have in store for us at RootsTech Connect?
Well, we are releasing a brand new series of videos for RootsTech. It's called Genealogy in a Minute. They are quick tutorials just to guide you along to your next discovery when you only have a minute to spare.
Wow. Give us some examples of some of the things you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so we recognize that some people are brand new to family history, and we want to make it as easy as possible for them to dive right in. So we have some very simple things like how to start a tree on Ancestry or what that little shaky leaf means. But then people who are more veteran family historians and maybe just are short on time, we wanted to provide them with some content too.
All right, just look for the Ancestry booth online with RootsTech Connect at rootstech.org.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G. Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
All right, we're back on America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And my guest today is David Zucker. And you may know this name because this is the man behind Naked Gun and Airplane, one of my favorite flicks, Police Squad, Scary Movies 3 through 5. I mean, David, your career is unbelievable. And here you are writing a book about family history.
I know, and you left out Top Secret and Basketball. So, I mean, there are more. They just keep coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah, but the problem is I only have so much time. I mean, I could list them all and we'd be done.
Yeah, but I'm more interested in family history, believe it or not. So I've had it with the movies, yes.
You're done?
But,
you've retired?
No.
Don't tell me that.
I still want to do movies, but from the time I was 7, I used to listen to my grandmother tell these stories about how she was born in this little village in what was then Austria-Hungary. She just said Hungary, and how she had to escape over the border with her mother to get out, and she was almost drowned in a flood. And then she made her way across Europe with her mother and 2 younger siblings and across in a boat. And the whole thing is, believe it or not, there's a lot of funny in it, of course, because I couldn't resist.
Well, but that's your personality, too, to infuse humor into a story that's obviously as serious as this one. The book is called, by the way, Before the Invention of Smiling, which I think is absolutely perfect for a book by David Zucker. Tell us about how discovering this information has influenced your life, and what were some of the processes you went through to uncover the things Grandma didn't tell you about.
Well, thank God for the internet. I mean, this has been a revelation. And in about 1976, my brother and I, on a trip from L.A. back to Milwaukee for 3 or 4 days, I decided to sit down with Grandma and get the whole story on tape. And that's what we did. And then
Wonderful.
Years and years later, we had a transcript made. And the first version of this was like a children's book because my kids were 2 and 4 in around 2003, 4. And I was very interested in getting a book because I wanted them to know the story because they never met Grandma.
Sure.
And part of that children's book was where there weren't photographs available. I got an artist, Gary Thomas, to draw pictures, like this flood that my grandmother is in. Obviously, there's no photos, so I put in drawings, which is pretty unique, I think, for a book like this. And then I flew with the artist to Slovakia and actually found the original property that my grandmother grew up on.
So what time period are we talking about here?
She was born in 1893, and she left when she was 16 in 1909.
So she beat World War I, thankfully, and beat World War II even more thankfully.
Yeah. Her name was Srolovitz. The general family was the Stearns. They were the first ones to come to Wisconsin. Some of them went to Kenosha and started a store, and then others went to Milwaukee. So that's really how we ended up there. And Grandma was on the tail end of that emigration from Hungary. They were the last of the family to leave. She had 7 brothers and sisters with her.
Did you find that some of those folks stayed behind and then got caught up in the world wars?
We don't know of anyone who stayed behind. I mean, they were a small village. It was Hunkoce, or Hunkovce. One of the pictures in the book has me standing in front of this sign. And they were only 3 Jewish families. And her mother didn't want her older brothers going into the army because Russia needed soldiers to fight the Japanese in the 1905 war.
Right, yeah.
And they didn't keep kosher in the army, so that was out. So they started leaving in about the late 1890s. They went to Milwaukee to follow the Stearns, and then finally, even my grandmother's father left, but my grandmother's mother refused to leave because she wanted to visit the grave sites every year to say the prayers. I mean, it's insane. Obviously, if they stayed, I think they all would have been wiped out.
Yes, I'm sure you're absolutely right. So what year did they wind up in Milwaukee?
1909.
And so this was your whole family area coming of age. It seems to me there's an awful lot of comedy that came out of Milwaukee, not the least of which was like Happy Days, right?
Yeah, Happy Days. Tom Miller was from Milwaukee, either Miller or Milkus. Those are the producers.
Mm-hmm.
And they based Happy Days on this burger drive-in ice cream place called the
Mel's?
Milky Way.
The Milky Way. Okay, and then
Milky Way.
And then it became Mel's.
Yes, for TV.
Yeah.
And then the actual Milky Way became Kopp's. It's still famous for the ice cream.
Is that right? So where do you think your sense for humor emerged from, within your family and within the surroundings of winding up in Milwaukee?
Well, I'm not sure. A lot of it was Milwaukee because Milwaukee obviously was not New York or Hollywood. Milwaukee was a place where things came to, not where things emanated from. And so we consumed all this Mission Impossible TV show and The Untouchables and, Sea Hunt. So we grew up watching, Robert Stack, Lloyd Bridges,
right,
and Leslie Nielsen. And often we would make jokes at the expense of these shows, although we liked the shows. But I think at our high school, this kind of sense of humor, it was a very self-deprecating sense of humor. We were really laughing at ourselves and very aware that we were from podunk nowhere. Probably worse than Utah. Yeah, but
I'll take it.
Yes, thank you.
And so how do you feel that your family's history and all the things they overcame has fed into you?
Well, I think that somehow my grandfather was funny. There's a picture in the book where I'm standing on a chair at age 4 in between my dad and my grandpa. And Dad and I are wearing bow ties. And Grandpa, to match us for the picture, tied his necktie into a ridiculously huge bow tie.
Okay.
And with a serious face. And I point this out in the book. This is Leslie Nielsen. And my dad had a marvelous sense of humor and would say the most outrageous things, but never making an obvious ha-ha-ha joke out of it. He would just say it with a straight face. So we kind of learned that deadpan, and that really translated. Now, I don't know where that came from. My grandfather was born in Russia. The Russians kind of have a good sense of humor. Under all those years of communism and Stalinism,
mm-hmm.
they did learn to laugh, and there were jokes. But my dad never told jokes. He didn't know any jokes, but he was very funny.
I think the families that are closest, that are the most loving, that get together the most, are the ones who have the laughs.
I think so, and we had a very close family, and close with all the cousins. My grandmother had 10 grandkids. All us first cousins are still close. We're as close as brothers and sisters are.
Well, tell us a little more about the book now. It's available on Amazon, I would assume. Where else?
Yeah, you can get it just on Amazon, and then you can download it in Kindle and other things, because on Kindle, you don't get it in color, but you can get it on other platforms in color.
And what would you say, David, that you'd like people to get from your book?
Well, I would like them to get that they have the possibility of doing this exact thing, really, of interviewing their grandparents. And a lot of people who I know who have just read the book have said, oh, I wish I had done this. In that way, it's really an inspiration, and you can really look up a lot of family history and a lot of ancillary items on the internet. Like, I got all these pictures, like what train travel was like in 1909, what it must have been like for them to travel across Europe and then America in that first decade of the 20th century. And so all these things are visual. In fact, another thing I found was, so they get to Ellis Island in August of 1909, and then I found this newspaper article from a month later in September that Wilbur Wright flew his Wright aeroplane around the Statue of Liberty.
Yes. Yeah, I've read about that.
1 million people gathered in the harbor to watch that, so they missed that. But that's the era that she arrived in, and she lived to see the moon landing.
Isn't that something? It is absolutely amazing when you run into that. I had a grandfather born in 1886. He died in 1975, and we would interview him. I've got interviews from him also because I was fortunate enough to catch the bug in my 20s. And my mother did it too. She was into that. So we have a lot of these interviews, and I absolutely concur with you. Anybody who's not interviewing the oldest members of their family are really missing out on an opportunity for some life-changing information that can really support you throughout your whole life. I mean, we stand on their shoulders, and it's fascinating to hear what they did to get us to where we are.
Exactly. And I want my kids to know where they came from because it's so different from their life now. My grandmother was born in a place that had no running water. And in fact, one of the drawings is when they get to the Krakow train station in 1909, her younger brother and sister just kept going into the bathroom and turning on the faucets. They couldn't believe there was water coming out of faucets. There were no automobiles, no airplanes, not even telephones there in this village. I bring out in the book, nothing had changed for 3,000 years. Life went at the speed of the clip-clop of horses.
Has any of this inspired you to consider creating some film around this?
Oddly enough, yes. People have suggested that this might be some material for some kind of movie because the book goes back and forth between 1893, 1909, and the 1940s during my parents' their day, and then my career in the 80s with the movies. The book only goes up to 1985, and that's when my grandmother died. I limited it purposely, and I only tried to do my career where it intersected with Grandma, like when we showed Grandma an edited version of Kentucky Fried Movie. We later found out that Grandma and Aunt Bee and Uncle Maury actually went to the Fox Bay Theater in Shorewood to see the movie, and so we said, yikes, you know, because they wanted to see our names on the big screen,
of course. The book is Before the Invention of Smiling. It's by my guest, David Zucker, the man behind Scary Movies and Naked Guns and Airplane and Police Squad, and obviously a close personal friend of Leslie Nielsen. So,
that's right.
David, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an honor and a pleasure, and good luck with the book.
Okay, thank you very much.
And on the way next, another amateur genie with an amazing find that she's turned into a book about her Cherokee ancestor. Catch my visit with Deborah Yates coming up next in 5 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Welcome back to America's Family History Show, Extreme Genes. And extremegenes.com. It is Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. And I'm always amazed by people who make these incredible discoveries. And all of a sudden, they're writing books. And my next guest is Deborah Yates. She's down on the west coast of Florida in the Gulf neighborhood. And Deborah is one of those people. She discovered a woman of many names. In fact, that's the name of her book. It's about Nancy Nenyehi, who is also known as Nancy Ward, and many other names. And she was quite an ancestor, wasn't she, Deborah?
Oh, yes. She's very rich with history.
Tell me about your research, how it got started and how it led to this.
Well, I started just to write down the stories that my grandfather and his siblings had told me over the years. I wanted to make sure that those stories weren't lost because it's not documented that well. Our stories, the Cherokee stories, we, of course, believed in the spoken word. We were storytellers, and those stories got passed down, and I just wanted to make sure that I put them down for the kids, and then I sent them off to be compiled. And when the lady gave me my works back, she was crying, and I said, "What's wrong, Sandy?" And she said, "Well, this is a book. You've got to share this with the world. People have got to know this story." And I said, okay. So that's what I pondered on it for a little bit, and then I started thinking, yeah, this may be the way to go. So my story is basically an homage to my grandmother, Nanyehi, who became Nancy Ward when she married her second husband, who is not my grandfather, Bryant Ward. My grandfather was Kingfisher. He was a Native American Cherokee Indian also. Okay. And he died at what was called the Battle of Taliwa, which in our Cherokee culture was one of the biggest battles that we ever fought. I wanted to really get her young story out there because there wasn't much out there. Her older life after she married Bryant Ward is fairly well documented, and I thought, well, this is my chance to pay respect to Kingfisher.
Now, when you said Nancy's your grandmother, you mean she's more like your fifth great, right?
She's like my seventh great grandmother.
Seventh, okay.
Yes, yes.
And I see her involvement here with Daniel Boone and George Washington. Tell us about some of that.
Well, her relationship with Daniel Boone would go back to what was called the Transylvania Company, which Daniel Boone represented them, and she sold him Kentucky.
Oh, wow. So she was an agent. She sold in Kentucky. Okay.
She was quite the arbitrator, don't you know, negotiator. She was known for being a negotiator in many ways. She signed peace treaties that allowed George Washington to be able to traverse the country, where beforehand he would have been met with resistance from the different Native American tribes. So that's sort of her connection to him. I was told that he saved her life when she was taken hostage. I believe it was in Sevierville, Tennessee, with 13 other chiefs. And her one uncle, who was named Attakullakulla, was in contact with a man named Thomas Jefferson, who was also part of that early culture.
I've heard of that guy, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. And he was, of course, in touch with George Washington, and they were able to procure her release along with her other uncle, who was called Oconostow, which was the war chief of the Cherokee at that time. And as soon as pretty much they were released, the other chiefs were all slaughtered. So that's how he saved her. She saved him by, of course, opening up those routes that would not normally have been accessible to him.
Oh, interesting. So if he had gone on another route, then he would have been in grave danger.
Absolutely, he would have been. Not that many people, I don't think, really understand how intricately that people worked closely together. The different tribes did in a lot of ways. Had we united better a long time ago, like several hundred years ago, maybe the country wouldn't have worked out like it did, and the Cherokee and many other beautiful Native American tribes wouldn't have ended up isolated out there in Oklahoma. George Washington did promise Nanyehi that her lands were supposed to be held in a trust for all time. But for some reason or another, when that fellow named Andrew Jackson got in there, he decided that that was not going to be held up. And all the lands, of course, hers as well, were dispersed amongst white settlers.
Yes, it's quite a history. There's no doubt about it. Tell me, where did Nancy get all these names from?
Those names, a lot of them come by good deeds that you've done or titles that you held. You became known as that. So that's how you get a lot of those names. Gegayu means beloved woman. She was, I believe, what you would consider the last Gegayu of the Cherokee before the Trail of Tears. There's been many since then, but that would kind of fall under a little bit different category. So now, that's how you got a lot of your names.
So there's a state historical marker that the DAR, the Daughters of American Revolution, have placed in Tennessee. Tell us about that.
There's many markers. There is a state, federal, and local government marker there, where the federal government recognizes her as the last princess and beloved woman of the Cherokee tribe. There was actually a highway scheduled to go right through her gravesite, and they were going to move her again. She's been moved several times already, and the federal government stepped in and didn't allow the TVA to move her again. And I was very glad to see that that did not happen, but had the federal government not stepped in, that's exactly what would have happened. Mm-hmm. She was buried up in Benton, Tennessee previous to that, and then dug up and moved when they built a jail and held somewhere, and then they ended up at Woman Killer Ford with her son. who was already buried up there as well. There's a beautiful tear-shaped marker that tells who's buried there now as you enter the park, and beautiful stone benches that have some of her famous words from some of her speeches there. So it's just been an amazing journey. And then we had a rededication there a couple years ago at the park, and hope to have one there in 2022, which would be the 200-year anniversary of her passing, and just keep the area alive with the culture and the spirit of Nancy Ward.
Yeah. Now, she also, as I understood it, foretold one of the great tragedies in America, the Trail of Tears. What was this prediction?
She said, and my grandfather, he would do these hand movements as he would tell me that. She said, I see my people walking in a line with tears streaming down their face.
Wow. That's pretty accurate.
That's where we got Trail of Tears from. So she had the gift of precognition. She was a very talented woman. She was trained very young in life to be such a person. Her birth was foretold that there would be a great woman rise from the Wolf clan of the Cherokee that would lead her people to greatness. And when she was born, would have been my ninth great grandmother took her to be bathed in the creek, because that's something that if you're a Cherokee Indian, that's what you did. You took a bath every day.
Okay.
So after her birth, her grandmother took her there to bathe her. And as they were coming up out of the creek bed, there was a white wolf standing above the embankment there. And she was the wife of the great leader, Attakullakulla. He was declared the Emperor of America by King George II, and he sent him a raccoon cap, and he called it the Crown of Tennessee. Tennessee was supposed to have been called Tennessee.
Oh.
And then the white folks got a hold of it and just made a mess of it and called it Tennessee. Tennessee would have been so much easier.
The book is called Woman of Many Names. The author is Deborah Yates, my guest, and you can get the book at Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. And Deb, it's been a delight to talk with you. Congratulations on the research and your first book.
Thank you so much. Hopefully there'll be another one along the line here sometime.
And on the way next, David Allen Lambert is back as we answer another listener question with Ask Us Anything in 3 minutes on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. Hey, it's Fisher, and here it comes, RootsTech Connect. We've been hearing about it for a long time. It's going to be February 25th, 6th, and 7th, and Ancestry.com is going to be a big part of it. Krista Cowan from Ancestry is on the line with me right now. And Krista, what do you guys have in store for us at RootsTech Connect?
Well, we are releasing a brand new series of videos for RootsTech. It's called Genealogy in a Minute. They are quick tutorials just to guide you along to your next discovery when you only have a minute to spare.
Wow. Give us some examples of some of the things you're going to be doing.
Yeah, so we recognize that some people are brand new to family history, and we want to make it as easy as possible for them to dive right in. So we have some very simple things like how to start a tree on Ancestry or what that little shaky leaf means. But then people who are more veteran family historians and maybe just are short on time, we wanted to provide them with some content too.
All right, just look for the Ancestry booth online with RootsTech Connect at rootstech.org. RootsTech Connect is here. Will you be there? RootsTech is a gathering unlike any other. Get ready for 72 hours of family discovery and celebration as part of this free virtual event from February 25th through the 27th. Be inspired as you listen to electrifying and uplifting keynote speakers from around the world, and even see how you're related to any of more than 200,000 registered RootsTech participants wherever they are in the world. This is the 11th annual RootsTech event, sponsored and hosted by Family Search. But this year is different. The entire event will be delivered virtually and free of charge to anyone in the world. Register today at rootstech.org. Customize your experience by creating your own conference schedule from hundreds of engaging video classes. And don't forget to check out the virtual exhibition hall. Join us for as much as you'd like from the comfort and safety of your own home. Register today and then tune in February 25th through the 27th. Learn more today by visiting rootstech.org.
At Legacy Tree Genealogists, we provide families like yours with the stories of your ancestors, a legacy that will be cherished for generations to come. Legacy Tree Genealogists provides genealogy research for clients worldwide, helping them discover their roots and personal history through records, narratives, and DNA analysis. And when your research requires access to on-site archives in the countries your ancestors lived, Legacy Tree Genealogists has researchers in more than 100 countries around the globe who know the local language and how to get their hands on the records you need. Legacy Tree Genealogists is the recommended research firm of genealogy industry leaders worldwide, including MyHeritage, 23andMe, and more. Check out what our clients have to say. Absolutely the best. They communicated through the entire process, and my report arrived on time. The story of my family with supporting documents was very fulfilling. Tom G., Google review. Don't wait any longer. Request your free quote today at legacytree.com. Legacy Tree Genealogists. We do the research. You enjoy the discoveries.
All right, we're back. It's Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show, and ExtremeGenes.com. It is Fisher here with Sabin Streeter. He is the showrunner, the producer, the director, the Grand Imperial Poobah of Dr. Henry Louis Gates' show on PBS, Finding Your Roots. And Sabin, just this past week, of course, right before the break for, what is it, Pledge Month, right, on PBS. You had your last show before the break. Tell us about it so people can stream it.
All right, I'm very excited to be on. So this show is two country musicians, Clint Black and Roseanne Cash, and we go back to some pretty interesting scenes in American history. Both of them have on their mother's side Sicilian ancestors who come here, and Clint has a guy who comes over from Palermo and becomes a professional musician, believe it or not. He's a violinist, and he ends up playing at these silent music theaters, and it's super interesting immigrant story. On Roseanne's side, she has Sicilian immigrants who come over and end up going to New Orleans and then to Texas and start a big Italian-American sort of import grocery store. They both, on their mother's sides, have these kind of classic Italian immigrant stories. People come with nothing and make a life for themselves. And Clint, actually, it's a life for himself in music, which Clint was super interested in.
Sure.
On Clint's father's side, we have this whole kind of Civil War epic, really, where his fourth great-grandfather is a guy who's about 50 years old, has 5 sons. He's a prominent Texas farmer, slave owner. 4 of his sons go off to war, and 2 of them die. One of them, who survives, is Clint's third great-grandfather. But the fourth great-grandfather seems to be understandably broken by the experience. He ends up spending, I think, 2 years riding around the South on horseback, looking for his lost sons' graves and never finding him. When he comes back home, he's 56 years old. He applies to med school.
What?
We have no idea if he ever went. I mean, the records for med schools in that era are not well. We have recommendation letters of him applying to med school, and we assume that he decided to sort of change his life based on what he'd seen traveling around the South and seeing all this carnage post-Civil War. He was riding through Georgia and Tennessee where his boys had been killed and looking for their bodies. So it's really an unbelievable story, and Clint was stunned by it. As it turns out, with Clint's DNA, he has a tiny amount of African DNA. Somewhere in those distant recesses of his colonial ancestors, probably in South Carolina, which was a heavy slave importing state, there was some kind of interchange between an African American and one of Clint's European ancestors. And he was very excited by this as well. So then we turned to Roseanne Cash, and she had Sicilian ancestors on one line of her mother's family tree. On her other line, we had this incredible story. Basically, when she was 10 years old, her dad, Johnny Cash, huge country music star, is arrested for amphetamine use. And in the news coverage of that arrest, her mother, a woman named Vivian, is photographed and shown for the first time. And a lot of America had not seen Vivian Cash. And she looks in these photos like she might be African American. And this was at a time when interracial marriage was illegal in the South. And a lot of these white nationalist publications were saying, like, Johnny Cash is married to a black woman. For 2 years, the Klan staged rallies at his concerts.
Wow.
Johnny Cash actually made a public statement saying that Vivian was Italian and not black. Well, we found out that Johnny Cash and Vivian were wrong. There was African ancestry in Vivian's line. She didn't know it. It had been concealed. We went back to her third great-grandmother, a woman named Sarah Shields, and discovered that Sarah's mother was enslaved, that Sarah had been born into slavery and freed by her own father, who was a white man. And then we found another amazing thing, which was that Johnny Cash himself had some African ancestry, much like Clint Black.
Wow, Sabin. Sounds like a great episode. And, of course, if you want to watch the show, it's easy to do. You just go to pbs.org, and you can see that and all the previous episodes. And we look forward to getting back with Dr. Yates again in April. And you, Sabin, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much. I look forward to being back again. And Dr. Yates, I know, looks forward to being back.
And coming up next, David Allen Lambert takes on another listener question with Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show. All right, coming up to the back end of the show here, it's Ask Us Anything on Extreme Genes, America's Family History Show at extremegenes.com. Fisher here, your radio root sleuth. David Allen Lambert is back from the New England Historic Genealogical Society and AmericanAncestors.org. And David, we have a question from Ashley in Omaha, Nebraska. She says, guys, I found the tombstone of one of my ancestors who died in 1765. And the carving was ornate. There even appears to be an image of him carved on the stone. What can you tell me about what this means? David, I know you did a lecture on cemeteries at RootsTech Connect. What can you tell her?
Well, that's an interesting question. I actually kind of bring up the subject of gravestones and the different carvings on them. So on early gravestones, you can find these portrait stones, Fish. They're really ornate, but sometimes they're of the relative. And sometimes they're just a cookie cutter from other stones. Ashley, with Billion Graves and Find a Grave, you can actually go and browse gravestones from the comfort of your own home and maybe find a stone that looks similar to it. The other thing that you can do is there's a great organization in the Northeast called the Association for Gravestone Studies. And sometimes carvers are kind of unique. So they have a style that somebody may have already documented years and years ago that they may be able to tell. But there's even a better clue. Ashley, I want you to look at the probate for your ancestor and see if there's a receipt in the probate packet that says a gravestone cost. So that would say sometimes $5 for a gravestone, or in this case, £5, to the carver. And that would be amazing because then you could identify the carver, and the Association for Gravestone Studies probably already knows about this colonial carver. And the other thing is, I believe now with Google, you can even do image searches. That means you can take an image and have it search for it. So maybe you can even use that technology to dig a little deeper.
Wow. Isn't that amazing, all the things that we can do? I mean, even from when we started Extreme Genes 8 years ago, that this is all possible. But I have never run across a stone with an image carved in it like that. And you're saying, David, that some of them are just kind of like a standard male from that time period or a standard female, but some of them are the actual folks?
Exactly. In fact, my fifth great-grandmother, Anna Longfellow Poor's stone from 1792 up in Newbury, Mass., I thought for the longest time this curly-haired female cherub was her. Until I went to a cemetery further on down the road and found three of them just like it by the same carver.
So it's just kind of a standard cookie cutter thing like you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot nicer than the death heads of the 18th century, the winged skulls.
Yeah.
But some of them, like if they're a minister or somebody of note in the community, portrait stones did come out. They're usually like an oval shape with a clergy collar on them, or they might even have a hat. And they've even had ones for ship captains and whatnot. And these are styles that started in the Northeast, but I've seen them all the way down to South Carolina. And if you do have an image of your ancestor, how great is that from somebody who lived over 250 years ago?
How often does that come up?
Not as often as we might like, but they are possible. Again, you have to rule out, like I did, that it's not a cookie cutter of a style that was done for just all males or all females. And they also did them for children. And the Association for Gravestone Studies, as I'd mentioned, has a website, and it's gravestonstudies.org. And they've had a journal out since 1977, which have articles and whatnot that can probably give you some clue if there's actually a gravestone carver that was doing these type of portrait stones.
All right. Fascinating stuff, David. Thanks so much. And Ashley, great question. David, talk to you next week.
Talk to you soon, my friend.
All right, and that's our show for this week. Thanks so much for joining us. And don't forget to catch the podcast if you missed any of the show or you want to catch it again on iTunes, iHeartRadio, ExtremeGenes.com, Spotify, wherever great podcasts are found. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you again next week. And remember, as far as everyone knows, we're a nice, normal family.